G'day, I'm Owen. You've joined the pub test, and this is the first video in what's going to be what I'm calling the Mary Kelly deep dive, because I really didn't know what to title it. But like I did with the possible victims, I'm going to be releasing a few videos in a row, then putting them all together into one long video. Now, I don't think each video in itself will be necessarily long. It's just there's a lot of information to get through. So without further ado, enjoy Mary Kelly the Deep Dive, Part 1. G'day, I'm Owen. You've joined the pub test, and in this one we are looking at the Mary Kelly crime scene and the victim herself and the possible connections that we can make. Now, if you're a regular here to the pub test, as we've got lots of new viewers, you'll know that I have always struggled with the Mary Kelly crime scene as being part of the Jack the Ripper saga, because I feel if we took that one out and just look at it in isolation, well, a lot of other things make sense when it comes to Jack the Ripper, but trying to make most of the suspects fit this crime has always been a difficult thing for me. Now, we will be unpacking a great deal of information here. So without further ado, let's put it to the pub test. Now, Mary Kelly came from Limerick Island, and we will be talking a lot about people from Ireland in this, and some of them are very unsavoury, and I just have to make this point now that not everyone from Ireland is an unsavoury individual. In fact, I've got a good friend of mine who has Irish heritage. He's also bulletproof, Rick O'Shea. I'll just pause while you finish your laughter. If you need to hit the pause button a bit longer, then please do so. But getting back to Mary Kelly right now, it is just quite odd that even that detail, where she actually came from, is disputed, like so many other things that she herself said, or at least Joe Barnett said, happened in her life. So it's stated that she had been married, but the husband died in a mining accident. She may have had a child. At one point she was working as a high-end escort overseas, and then for whatever reason ends up as an unfortunate in the East End of London. Now, there's so many differing reports even about what she looked like. Some say she was an absolute stunner, but the pictures that we see drawn of her don't suggest that at all. But she was doing better than most of the unfortunates, because she had her own lodging place. In fact, she had a steady boyfriend at the time in Joe Barnett. And yes, they did have difficulties, those two. Things weren't always going swimmingly well. And when her attack happened, they were separated. The real point being made here is we know so much about all the other victims. We can trace their family and know their history, including Elizabeth Stride, who came from overseas, and yet we know what happened in her home country before she came out to England. And her family can be traced back to there, but not so with Mary Kelly. And the majority of information we have, we're relying on the testimony of Joseph Barnett. And that can be very problematic in this situation, because he had probably good reason not to necessarily give the full detail, as we are going to talk about. Now, some of the things that we are discussing have been covered in previous videos, but there is a lot here, which is new information, which I think really does paint the real picture of 13 Miller's Court and the demise of Mary Kelly. So initially, looking at Joe Barnett. So on the day when the attack happened, they were not living together. They were separated. And that is an important little detail, because it stated that Joe Barnett was on his way back to Miller's Court because he had heard of an attack that had happened, and he wanted to get back there just in case it could have been Mary Kelly. I find it odd that he was hoofing it back to 13 Miller's Court, and people asked him, what are you doing? Well, maybe Mary Kelly is the victim of this crime. Now, after a long delay, he's able to get inside the room with the police, and he identifies the body from the colour of the eyes of the victim and the hair. But that has never sat well with me at all. Now, I know we are all different, but that crime scene was absolutely horrific. The body on that bed was unidentifiable by so many different means, because whoever had performed this attack had made sure that it was going to be difficult to prove who that person was. And I myself would not be able to stomach being in that room for any amount of time. It just would have, I would have been totally ill. And I've mentioned before, many crime scene investigators are literally ill when they walk into some of these scenes themselves. So a person who goes into that room thinking it could be their loved one, even though they were apart, it seems like Joe Barnett, at least according to him, still had strong feelings for Mary Kelly, was able to take the time to look into the eyes to see the colour of the eyes and then also identify the hair. It just, to me, still feels like he was definitely going to say it was Mary Kelly who was in that room. And there's some other details. See, the body still had a piece of clothing, and he wasn't asked to ID that. Was that something that he would recognise Mary Kelly wearing? It said that Mary Kelly had some prominent front teeth or something very obvious about her dental. But they don't use that to identify the body. And also, apparently her ears were rather prominent, and again, that's not something that's mentioned. It's just the eyes and the hair. I would have thought, now I don't know if dental records were all that extant, or even if the teeth could have been recognised, even if they were still there, I don't know, but it just seems odd. But then what's more, so put yourself in Joe Barnett's situation. You've walked in, you've had to see this absolutely horrific scene and identify what you believe is to be your loved one, and then they haul you off for questioning. Now, admittedly, you always need to eliminate the spouse when you find a victim like that. The reason is, this one really did seem like overkill. Now, overkill is described as a crime of passion almost, where the person just gets in such a frenzy because of personal feelings. They have an attachment to the victim and they just uncontrollably lose themselves. Now, that is not true of probably 4 of the other victims. See, Martha Tabram, who many people consider a Jack the Ripper victim, would be a classic of overkill, like 36 stab wounds, so that could have very well have been a personal attack for sure. But the other victims that are attributed to Jack the Ripper, 4 of the canonical ones, were almost clinical. Like they took the person's life and then were doing some bizarre surgery to remove organs on a few of them. But this Mary Kelly one, well, it went way beyond that. This did look very much like someone was making a statement. And so quite rightly, Joe Barnett is under serious consideration. And they just don't ask him a few questions. He's in there for hours. But with no proof, well, they have to let him go. And it's interesting that they never came out and said that he was innocent as such, but they really had nothing on him. And then because this was attributed to Jack the Ripper crimes, and it was pinned very quickly as one, well, they really had little evidence to pin him for the other 4. And so he just would have dropped off the radar. But what is interesting here, be with all the publicity, now this crime almost caused a riot. The people of the East End had had enough, and they're saying do something about this. So the inquest was held very quickly, and it did not go on for long, unlike many of the other crimes that had occurred. The inquest took days sometimes. There was even a break of a week in between a couple of these inquests before they picked up again. They wanted to get to the bottom of this. But at this particular one, now it was a different coroner, but anyone who basically wasn't towing the line that the establishment wanted were either bullied or ignored. Because there were two people who definitely said they saw Mary Kelly after the time it was proven the person was murdered in 13 Millers Court. And one particular lady who testified to that was effectively bullied and made to look silly at the inquest, so she backs away from the statement. And I can understand why you would, because you have nothing to gain. But that is also something that really raises question marks about the true happenings there in 13 Millers Court. Also, the funeral is held very quickly. So Mary Kelly, the person in that room, is interred in no time at all, to the point where none of her family from Ireland were able to be in attendance. And that's the official record of that, which we are going to question. Now, it's possible that the family couldn't afford to travel to London to attend the funeral. It's also possible, and this will be explored later in the video, that they may not have wanted to identify with Mary Kelly because of the activities she was engaged in. And we're not talking about walking the streets and plying that particular trade as an unfortunate. No, there are suggestions that there were other things at play with Mary Kelly, and it may not have been wise for the family to say we know her, because retribution could have come back on them as well. But here's a very odd thing, and a little known detail about Mary Kelly. And that's that the police did have the letters that Mary Kelly is supposed to have received from her family back in Ireland. And they go back to find where these letters were posted from to talk to the family, and they're unable to do so. Remembering this was a big case. They wanted to get some answers and at least let the family know, but they can't find them. Which is the big reason as to why no family were in attendance, because they weren't notified. Nobody knew how to get in touch with them. So that brings a very interesting question. Who sent the letters? Where on earth did they come from? Well, now we get into Mary Kelly's real identity, possible real identity. Some of the papers in the day after this crime referred to her as Mary McCarthy. Yeah, and I know people say, well, that was just because she was staying at McCarthy's Rents. John McCarthy and his wife ran Miller's Court, so they bought it from a bloke named Miller. The court remained Miller's Court, but colloquially in the area, it was known as McCarthy's Rents. Because of that, and she was also staying in the unit right beside the shop, they may have thought that, yeah, she was a McCarthy. So it's just a bit of a misunderstanding. Yet, here is something. So the police didn't just stop at looking at trying to trace back the letters to see where they'd come from back in Ireland. They decided in the Limerick area, well, let's dig and find anyone who was born Mary Kelly. And they did. They did find one name that matched. But the year of birth was different to what Mary Kelly said, but that's probably not to be surprising, because they often would use different years of birth, and records weren't great. But the intriguing thing here is those parents to this Mary Kelly, well, the mother's maiden name was McCarthy. And so it's possible the papers weren't just reporting a misunderstanding because she was staying at McCarthy's Rents. She may have been using that name McCarthy as well, because many people used multiple names back then. And then that raises an intriguing thing. Was there an actual blood relationship between John McCarthy and Mary Kelly? It is possible, because people say that would explain why she was allowed to get so far behind in the rent that Joe Barnett said, which was verified by John McCarthy. Now, if it was a cousin or some type of relative, you might just be that bit more lenient. Some people have made the claim that maybe John McCarthy was able to come in and use Mary Kelly's services, and that's maybe why he let the rent go for so long. I don't believe that at all, for reasons we're going to discuss very shortly. But I will make this statement. It is funny that if you meet someone of your same last name, well, you sort of feel a bit of a connection, don't you? Somewhere down the track, you're related. And you just have that little bit more, I don't know, family feeling. And so that could very well explain why John McCarthy was allowing that situation to go on. Yet it doesn't explain what happened when the body was found. McCarthy does not act like a concerned relative. If you knew that person, and she'd been staying in Miller's Court for a little while, and it could have been a relative, you would not do what McCarthy did when Indian Harry, Thomas Bowyer, finds the body. So Indian Harry peeks through the window, which they knew was broken, because he could peek through the curtain through the broken window, and interestingly, from that broken window, you could reach in and undo the lock. Not that difficult. But he goes back, rightly, I would suggest, to John McCarthy and says, mate, we got a problem. And so McCarthy then looks through the window, sends Indian Harry off to the police, whilst for a good 8 minutes or so, he's still on site, but catches up with Indian Harry before he gets to the police station. And at the police station, he says, I sent Indian Harry off first before I came running. And then later on changes that story to say that they both left together. But it is, without doubt, McCarthy stayed behind for a certain amount of time doing what, we have to ask. Knowing he would have had access into that room, though we know that his shop that he ran at Miller's Court, well, was probably doing some illegal activities and may have been supported a little bit in those illegal activities by Sergeant Thick, which I've discussed in a previous video as well. Yeah, McCarthy wasn't on the level. He wasn't just an honest shopkeeper. And he was allowing unfortunates to have lodging in Miller's Court, which was illegal. And I would say that he probably was getting extra money for allowing that to happen, sort of charging a premium for those rooms. But that activity alone could have put him in prison, but who knows what else he had to hide before he knew the police were going to swarm around his shop and his lodging places. And it has been discussed previous to why the police waited outside Miller's Court for the bloodhounds to turn up. Yes, they were getting bloodhounds to try and trace Jack the Ripper, but the bloodhounds weren't of use in this situation. And after quite a few hours, McCarthy knocks the door down to get inside. Again, that is strange when they know the window's broken. They know they could probably reach that lock. It really wasn't a complicated process. So why did he go to the process of knocking the door down? Well, it probably didn't bother him, because people say, why would you knock down your own gear? Well, that place was going to get boarded up anyway, so who cares about the door? But this scene was so horrific, it actually led to some of the very first known crime scene photos, and they are out there. And unfortunately, as we go through this story, we will be looking at some detail of some of the injury on the person found inside 13 Miller's Court. But the strangest part to all of this is not long after this most brutal crime, and the outrage in the press was huge, The people on the street were going to riot. They wanted something done. The police needed this sorted. All the interest and all the investigation just drops off a cliff. This ended the Jack the Ripper saga. So the question is, if the bloke wasn't caught, why? Well, let's look at the first suggestion. Well, I'm sorry for leaving you on that cliffhanger, but this, less time in front of the camera on this one, more time behind the scenes in digging up information. And I really feel that this little series will either raise some really good questions you might have or provide some answers as well, I'm hoping, along the way. As I said, this will be packaged into one long video when this is complete, and I'm not too sure if it's 3 or 4 videos yet. May even be 5, but we'll find out. But I will be doing these sequentially, so you will get these videos one after the other. I'm putting on hold doing cases from outside the Jack the Ripper story until this one is complete. And the background picture you see is a place I've actually been. It's the King Tai Brewery in Coffs Harbour, which is in the mid-north coast of New South Wales in Australia. They have their brewery on site. They do some really nice food. If you're ever around Coffs Harbour, go check them out. And if you know of a pub that needs to be displayed here on the pub test, let me know. I'm more than keen. If they've got a good photo and have got a good story, well, we'll put them up on the pub test. But thank you so much for all your support. This channel is on still an upward trend, and all your support for many of you who have been around from the start. I cannot thank you enough for just keeping this channel going. And let's just see where it might end up. And thank you all who are sharing this content wherever you are. I'm Owen, you've been watching the Pub Test, and we will see you on the next one for the second part of the Mary Kelly Deep Dive.